I received a warning.
You received a
Do
warning?
Do you have something that you
I
want to
received a warning because I was.
Okay.
Would like a close-up when she's out there. Hold the camera.
Good evening. I'd like to start the meeting tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Liebig.
Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And first off, we have a treat tonight. We have the swearing in of the new planning commissioner. Good evening.
Hello.
Commissioner Bernadette Austin, if you please stand, raise your right hand, and repeat after me. I, Bernadette Austin, do solemnly swear
I, Bernadette Austin, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will take this obligation freely
that I will take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome. Next up, we have presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the commission. Do we have any items? Okay, moving on. Correspondence and staff communications.
Yes, thank you, Chair Perez. A few brief remarks. First of all, on behalf of staff and City Attorney's Office, I'd like to welcome our new Commissioner, Ms. Austin, tonight. A couple of things. You should have a memo in front of you from Kathy Allen regarding agenda item number 3, on the wireless telecommunications facility policy matter.
I only have one.
There should be just one memo.
Oh, I said a couple.
Yeah, one memo. Last night at City Council, important milestone general plan-wise was taken. Council approved the contract with our EIR consultant. So we will be definitely moving forward quickly on our general plan update effort. It's a big milestone. And speaking of the general plan, this past Monday night, we had a public meeting over at the community center across the street, attended by about 60 persons, and received a lot of good input about the few focus areas remaining in general plan to sort out. So we're sort of synthesizing all the impact information we received from the community members that attended that meeting, and that will help us try to finalize the general plan land use maps that will go into the EIR for further study. And then lastly, I just wanted to inform the commission that our colleague, senior planner Jim Bermudez, is leaving our fair city and going to a big new job in the city of Lincoln, so we will miss him. He could not be here tonight because of another matter, but he wanted to pass along his thanks to the commission and enjoyed serving you over 9 years with the city. So with that, that concludes communications at this time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Tilley. Next, disclosure of ex parte communications. Anybody for items on the agenda? Okay, great. Oh,
Madam Chairman, I have spoke with a couple of the landowners in that area.
okay.
Yeah, in regards to agenda item number 3, I've had ex parte communications.
Okay, Commissioner Olson. Anyone else? Okay. Next, we have consideration and approval of the minutes for April 3rd. Could I get a,
Sure, I move we approve the minutes of the April 3rd, 2014 commission meeting.
I get a second?
I'll second that.
Great, thank you. Also, there's been a recommendation to change the order of the agenda tonight. Could I get a motion to do that?
I'm not
we
sure
need
if we
to?
need a motion. I have no discussion. Do we need a motion?
Yeah, we would like a vote on changing the agenda order would be requested.
Okay. I'll move the recommended change to put item number 3 next on the agenda.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. So we will start off with,
Did we approve the minutes?
Just did.
yeah,
That was the minutes too?
yes, before
Oh.
that, yeah.
Okay. Must be losing it tonight. Tough night.
So we will start off with agenda item number 3, public workshop on changes to the city's wireless telecommunications facility policy, returning to the setback requirements.
Associate Planner Kathy Allen will present this item.
Good evening, Chair Perez and members of the commission. On April 3rd, staff conducted a workshop and presented 2 proposed wireless projects before the Planning Commission for their consideration. These are the first wireless projects to come before the Planning Commission since we changed our wireless policy late last year. Both projects are intended to act as a replacement for the existing monopine located at the eastern end of Linden Road. The properties where the projects are located are on adjoining parcels, and both are zoned rural residential, as are neighboring parcels. As staff noted in the April 3rd staff report, neither project complies with the setback requirements as they are now specified in the revised policy. As the policy is currently written, towers could now be effectively prohibited within rural areas of the city. This was not the intent of the policy when it was revised. During the Planning Commission workshop, the Commission requested that staff review both projects to see if compliance could be achieved with revisions to them, and if not, prepare alternatives to address the issue of towers within rural areas. In regards to the memo, the table in your staff report did contain some inaccuracies. Staff has revised those, and the memo does show the correct measurements for the location of the towers. Even with the adjustments to correct the distances, neither project still meets the standards as currently written in the policy due to the requirement that wireless facilities be set back from the nearest residentially zoned property a distance of at least twice the height of the tower. The existing policy utilizes a hierarchical preference with respect to the type of preferred facilities. Due to the semi-rural nature of this area, it is likely that a tower would be the only feasible option in these or nearby locations. This is due to the fact that microcellular facilities have a very short range, and due to the rural nature, it is unlikely there are enough locations to mount them for this option to be feasible. The maximum height for buildings in a residential zone is 45 feet, which effectively precludes most roof-mounted and facade-mounted facilities due to the fact they're too low to interface with nearby facilities. Towers, however, can be constructed at a height which exceeds the allowable in the zone by 30 feet. The zoning ordinance also has a statute which allows the commission to determine if additional height is required for normal operation, as long as it's not injurious to neighboring properties or detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. The section of the policy we're looking at revising is section G of the wireless policy, and this is concerning prohibited facilities. Specifically, we're looking at changing section G3 of the policy, and that's the section where staff has suggested all the revisions. The current section reads that wireless telecommunications facilities located at a distance of less than twice the height of the tower pole from the nearest residentially zoned properties. It means those types of towers are prohibited. In taking these issues into account, staff has reviewed and prepared 3 options for revisions to that policy section. The first is eliminating section G3 from the prohibited list. Staff, however, does not recommend this option, as its total removal from the policy could result in undesirable encroachments of towers in and around residential areas. The second option is reducing the twice the height requirement to a height of 50 feet, or an alternative height at the recommendation of the commission. This option would allow some setback from the other residential parcels, but may still be considered too close to neighboring parcels. And also, this may not be appropriate in more urban portions of the city where several parcels could be affected. Because of this, staff also does not recommend this option. Finally, the third option is to change the ratio listed in G3 from the twice the height option to a 1-to-1 ratio based on the height of the tower as measured from the tower to the nearest residential structure, not property line. Staff does recommend this option. We feel it creates a reasonable setback from both towers and residences. This concludes staff's presentation. Myself or Mr. Tilley are happy to answer any questions. I'd like to note there are representatives from both of the projects here in the audience, and I believe they have filled out slips to speak on the project. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Do any of the commissioners have questions for Kathy? I'll start on my left. Commissioner Galvin?
I'll hold my comments.
I'll hold till after the public.
Okay. All right, I will take public comments. First request to speak is Joe Parker. If you'd like to come up, please, and state your name.
Good evening, Honorable Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Joe Parker. I'm counsel for Crown Castle, the applicant for the project at 1245 Linden Road. I'm here tonight to support your workshop with respect to consideration of an ordinance change. As the Commission is probably aware, my client's project is not a new site development, but rather a relocation of an existing facility that has been triggered by the city's own widening project, levee widening project. And I bring that to your attention because there is certainly a critical and urgent need for us to resolve this issue so that we can get this facility relocated and continue to sustain the level of coverage for this critical site that is necessary for your constituents. With respect to the recommendations from staff, we definitely support option number 1. I think option number 2 is problematic, particularly if there are subdivisions that are considered of those parcels in the future that may affect those setback requirements. Option 3 is a good option, I think, but I believe option 1 is better for the reasons stated in staff's report. I'd also point out if the Commission is uncomfortable with completely removing section G3, one alternative, a fourth alternative, is to consider perhaps a statement something along the lines that wireless telecommunication facility applications not meeting standard setback requirements shall be evaluated for acceptance at the sole discretion of planning staff and community development director, or something to that effect. So I just wanted to let you know that we support that. I am concerned a little bit about the timeline. You know, our relocation project is not a simple project. We have several carriers at that site. We need to stay ahead of the city project. And as I understand it, you have a road before you that you need and a process that you need to complete, but I would just ask for the commission's indulgence to complete that as quickly as possible in light of the fact that we do have an existing facility that provides service to a substantial number of your constituents, and we need to get it done. Lastly, as I understand it, there may be some consideration that these two projects may be asked to process concurrently through CEQA, and I would just ask that the commission consider perhaps just directing you know the selected project to process through that, again, for reasons associated with time and expense. I believe it makes sense to process in that manner, and again, I'd ask you to consider the fact that but for the city's relocation project, I wouldn't be here before you tonight, let alone asking you to reconsider your ordinance. So thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rick Hart.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Rick Hart, and I'm also one of the applicants on the other project. I helped figure out the changes in the measurements that we had, discrepancy, and we originally came in at 42 feet. I didn't quite understand how that was being measured, but we eventually got it straight, and I think it's important because it shows that this property, which is undersized for the area, can meet a 100-foot setback from the property line without having to worry about residential structures around it. So I think that option number 3, but I just don't see the reason why anybody that hasn't built a house has less rights than somebody who's already built a house. So if you have 2 lots and they're both next to each other, and this guy builds his house, and 6 months later this guy is going to build his, he's shortchanged because he gets the cell tower stuck in his backyard. I don't quite get that. But I think that using the property line would work fine. If a property this small can do it and meet that 100-foot setback and do a 100-foot tower, if that's what was permitted, or an 80, it would meet all those criteria. And then as far as what we want to build there, I mean, we want to come up with a plan, and this is where we're going to come to you, is like, we're going to come up with a couple of different ideas. One is to completely hide it. Okay, so one idea is we're having the barn relocated, so all the equipment's going to be inside. So you're going to have a barn, you'll have all the landscaping that we laid out last time, along with the benches and the park that we're going to put in, and you'll have the tree, and then we're doing mock-ups now that will show what it's going to look like in about 5 years. So the idea is if you can walk by and never know that it was a tower there, is that what you want? The other one, the second one would be, do you want, like Vista did, a water tower or some sort of landmark? So we're going to offer those up to you and see if that's which direction that you want us to go. And then we'll engineer it to however you guys see fit. If you want the landmark, fine. If you want it hidden, either way, okay? However you guys want to lay it out for that particular area, we'll go along with that. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was one more here. What was it? Do you guys have any questions for me, or we all?
If we do, we'll call you back up.
What's that?
If we do, we will call you back up.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's thing I forgot on it. Oh, there's one thing. We would also look at a possible rezone of the parcel. So that, to get the residential aspect off the board completely, and since the property's mostly being taken by the flood control agency, looking at rezoning it to either maybe public open space or something else, I could get with staff, and maybe we could submit that with the conditional use permit to get the whole residential thing off the board, if that's something that you guys thought should be done. Okay? All right? That was the one thing I couldn't remember. All right? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hurt. Next, we have Rory Hodgson.
Evening.
Evening.
I'm counsel for property owner adjacent to 1245, 1256 Linden Road. Purchased the property last year with plans to develop the property once the levy project is completed. So I know there's comments on the 15th, but I'm here to offer you my suggestion, which is just I would prefer the one that's not next to my property because it's the farthest away from the development. And I know I'll probably have an opportunity on May 15th for that as well. But I've tried to contact both parties, and I've only gotten back from one. So I look forward to the to what you guys are going to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, could
Chair?
you clarify which property that was? Which one your preference?
The one on South River Road. So we own there's an 8-acre piece on at 1256 Linden. So if you look on your map,
Is it 1256 or 1265?
or 1265, excuse me. So it's that piece right here. So and it's zoned for an 8-acre parcel with
It's hard
subdivided.
to see when your paper's down.
Excuse me.
For me, you know.
Excuse me. So it's this one right here, just to
The big
the just to the west of the 1245 property.
Okay.
So it's an 8-acre piece zoned for 1-acre parcels with a development that was already halfway pushed through the city when we purchased the property. And what we're interested in doing is possibly joining with another property to the west and building more lots. The problem here is that if 1245 were to be approved, we'd have a cell tower with the carrier boxes basically right in the backyard of 2 lots. And that's a concern of ours. So that's what I came here to say. So, thank you.
Madam Chair, just a quick comment. Would you be able to provide something in writing of what you just described to us?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to our commissioners who have questions or comments, and I'll start with Commissioner Galvin.
Just a couple of quick questions of staff. In option number 2, am I reading that right? 50 feet would be the limit? Nothing higher?
Really what this was referring to is coming up with an actual setback requirement of more of a specific number regardless of necessarily of the height of the tower. I think we got one word in there and it's misplaced, but in this particular area, it would just be a straight setback from the facility to a residential parcel. Regardless, it would be independent of the height of the proposed facility.
So the setback would be 50 feet?
Correct, yeah, and that's obviously a round number that we put out there for discussion purposes. But the notion on this one is that there would be a setback that would be independent of the height of the proposed facility.
Okay, so that becomes clear. And obviously, one I'm not really in favor of. In option 3, is there a height limit to the towers?
The height limits are not included within the wireless policy. They're still based on what's in our zoning ordinance.
Okay, all right.
Commissioner Austin?
Thank you. So it looks like the staff report appears that we're looking for preferences on the policy. We're not talking about the location, the proposed location. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. We would ask that the planning commission to consider this, the policy tonight, as this would be applicable, citywide. We're not here tonight to talk about the specifics of those two projects that were at the prayer meeting. So we would ask the commission to consider this matter tonight in a step or two back from those specific projects, even though obviously those are sort of what prompted this. Any changes that we would make in the policy will be applicable elsewhere in our community. So we would encourage you to think of it in that context.
Thank you. So those are just my questions. My lone comment at this point is just, I appreciate the recommendation to consider a possible rezone, but personally, I don't think that would be the best way to proceed as far as a potential option 4. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Liebig?
Thank you. Thank you, staff. I do have a couple questions. Regarding the flood control project, this was actually a prior comment, but I appreciate it coming up. Is there any planned rezoning of the adjacent properties as a result of the flood control project?
The current general plan land use map that, is still a working draft, and we do propose that the levee footprint would have a public open space zoning on it. So that would be the levee footprint, not necessarily any lands that are adjacent to it, but just what's within the levee footprint.
Okay. And this is a question for Mona, and this has to do with the federal law regarding the cell towers. Mona is here, correct?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Does the gap in coverage extend beyond city boundary for consideration? In other words, are we considering gap in coverage within the city, or do we also need to be considering the gap in coverage on I-5 across the river as a result of losing the tower?
The FCC would require that the proposed applicant demonstrate to the city that there would be a gap in coverage for its customer base. So however they present that evidence, usually it's in the form of maps, and it's, again, not based on necessarily jurisdiction, but rather their customer base.
Thank you for that clarification. And this is a tough one. I did read the policy, and I thought we did a good job on it last time, honestly. But here it is again, because there's an issue. So a couple of comments, and this is just one to staff. Under section 2, there are some numbering issues as a result of moving paragraphs around. If we could get that changed, that would be wonderful. My comments on the policy itself. I do have a little heartache reducing the distance from residential property. Partly, I have to imagine a pole at a 1-to-1 ratio. It's a 100-foot pole at 100 feet away. And how hard would that be to stomach? I also agree with Mr. Hart that I don't think it matters if there's a property or a house built on the property. If it's zoned residential, there's the potential of a residence being there, and to ignore that would degrade that value of the property potentially. So I'm not exactly in favor of that. My recommendation would be under prohibited facilities to modify number 3 to reduce the distance, but then in addition, under the permitted one, to add specification about added scrutiny and the need to show additional requirements between twice the distance and 500 feet. Those are just my comments. There's 4 more of you to go, and so I don't really want to get into the weeds of that without hearing everybody's comments on that and what you all think first. So I'm going to stop talking.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Liebig. Commissioner Olson?
The question I had was under option number 3. I don't quite understand the intent or the reasoning behind the nearest existing residential structure, comma, not the property line. Could you guys expound on that and how you came to that?
When we considered the 1-to-1 ratio, the intent of it was to at least place existing structures outside of a range where, should some catastrophe happen for some reason and the thing fell over, that houses wouldn't be squished by it.
But you would get that with the property line as well. If the property line were the limit, you would already have that. So we're saying between the property line and the existing residence?
We were just measuring, irrespective of the property lines, a distance where houses would be in a safe zone.
Yeah, this is another way to, approach this, because, we have been focusing on property lines, in the past, and this is a way to look at it really from where really the real world distance from the tower to somebody's home, and in any direction. So this is another way to sort of skin the cat. There could be different metrics, where we're trying to figure out a way to sort of resolve the situation at hand without cracking the door open to much wider and going against what the commission had recommended and the council ultimately approved when we revised the policy in the first place. We spent a lot of time talking about this setback issue when we revised the policy, a year or so ago. And if you remember the project on Jefferson, the water tank one, it, even though it was on a commercial property, it barely but did comply with this twice the height current setback issue, and we really thought we were onto something in that time. And it just so happens that in this, at least in this particular area that we've been looking at more recently, we have sort of this quandary that we're in. And so this is one other way to possibly look at a setback requirement, because we believe that the commission would want to have some form of a setback from a facility to residential properties, be it to the home itself or to the lot. So it appears, at least in this particular area of town that we have been focusing on lately, that, and is evidence, I think, by the memo, and especially the memo in front of you tonight that Kathy prepared, that it's really unlikely that the twice the height of the tower to a property line is going to work almost anywhere over there. It's just sort of a peculiarity of that sort of general region of town. So we wanted to give the commission another option, if you wanted to consider, is basing a setback requirement from an actual house on the ground rather than just a property line. But that's one option to consider.
Yeah, and just given, like what Commissioner Liebig brought up with the potential for other houses, and we had a speaker tonight with the adjacent property there, it seems to me it'd be a lot cleaner if we left it as property line instead of residential structure, that's all. Because there's the future possibility of a residential structure that may, be within that height.
Oh, that is true, and we sort of assume that there will be additional residences out in various parts of town, eventually, not just in the area we've been focusing on. So if we want to continue based on a setback from a property line, that is something we can continue to work on.
Okay. And then I had another question, and this is more of a kind of a curiosity, but what would it take to rezone the one property that we were talking about there, the 03 property?
Yeah, a rezoning is a completely other matter. We really aren't entertaining any individual rezone requests while we're updating the general plan holistically, and it's our staff's impression that regardless of how the property where the tower is proposed is zoned, it's its proximity to other properties that are zoned residential that really seems to be sort of the crux of the matter. So even if the property that, Mr. Hart had was zoned open space, for example, the properties or surrounding it would still be zoned residential, and you'd still be having a
Yeah.
setback issue.
Okay, well, let me ask it in a different way. Currently, under the general plan or the future of the general plan, what is the mechanism to rezone a piece of property?
Well, we are looking at, updating our general plan, which includes zoning, citywide, presently. And we have a land use map that we've been working on. The council's actually already, seen a few times over the years, and we are about to start an EIR on that land use map and the associated build-out figures. So we're really far down the path on that effort and aren't ready to, start to kind of go backwards, if you will, on looking at additional properties for potential rezones. We've been vetting that off and on for several years now. But the properties, but even if we were to entertain something on Mr. Hart's property, I would not expect that we would entertain changes on any of the other properties surrounding it. Those would remain residential. And so we'd kind of be back to the same point we seem to be in, with a tower proposed, in fairly close proximity to existing residences and future residences on residentially zoned property. So I don't see where a rezoning of Mr. Hart's property would change anything that we've been discussing, here tonight or at our previous meetings, in terms of what seems to be the quandary we have is proximity to residential.
And just to add a little bit more clarity to it, what Mr. Tilley was addressing would be a city-initiated zone change. However, any property owner may also submit an application for an applicant-initiated rezone. That would need to undergo its own independent environmental analysis. It's ultimately a legislative decision, so after the Planning Commission reviewed it and made it provided a recommendation on that, it would go to the City Council, and the Council would decide whether it would make good land use planning sense and whether it would comport with the ultimate goals of the general plan and the city zoning code.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moore?
I guess I do have a few questions. I'm looking at like page 1, and I remember Mr. Liebig brought it up last time. Both these parcels are zoned rural residential. One of them is a legitimate rural residential parcel, and Mr. Hart's, being smaller, will be a non-conforming residential parcel.
As the maps have been presented, it would be slightly non-conforming in size. The maps that he has presented shows it at approximately 0.8 of an acre.
Okay. Then, I guess with your new thing that you gave us, your new piece of paper, and it's talking about the height of the tower and distance of the tower to the nearest residential parcel, which would be the lot line. Is that what you're talking about?
It's measured from the tower pole itself to the nearest, in a straight line to the nearest parcel, which is one of the two parcels to the north.
So that is property line in the middle column there.
So the first parcel on Linden Road, it's 30 feet away from,
From the parcel to the south of it, yes.
That's
to
the
the
closest
south of
one.
it, or to the, I guess I'm kind of thinking of what Rory was talking about, the parcel to the west of it.
It's 50 feet from the parcel to the west.
Okay.
Yeah, that parcel actually is both south and west of the proposed location, so, but the closest distance is 30 feet to the south. It's
Oh,
probably.
I guess it is. It kind of goes in it wraps around it. You're
Yeah,
right.
it's roughly 50 feet to the west, but we measured, just the closest point, and
The
that's
closest point would be.
is south in this case. It's the same parcel, though.
And then the one on South River Road would be Mr. Hart's, and that's 101 feet to the nearest parcel line.
Yes.
So if we do a 1-to-1, he could have a 100-foot tower, and the other parcel could have a 30-foot tower?
if you measured to the property line, that's correct.
Right, okay. So, I guess, and Jeremy just brought it up a minute ago, and I marked it on mine. I think that, you have to count not only the existing parcel, but the potential parcel next door. Because that's what we did on the site down at Vickers Court Board. We were concerned about the property, not only the property that existed, but the potential property beside it. And I think you need to look at that. I think that's all part of what we look at. I guess my greatest question I have, and I always know that you'd like it when I come up with one of these good ones. How high does a tower have to be able to be viable?
From what we've been told from other carriers, about the lowest height they really like to put a set of antennas is about 60 feet. And so they go up from there.
I
And they
agree.
need several
So-
feet clearance between each set of antenna.
Is that for a multi-carrier antenna, or is that for a single?
Well, the facilities we've seen, the lowest we've ever seen any antenna is pretty much mounted is about 50 feet. And they tend to go up from there. This is one of the things that, our own policy is very heavy on supporting co-locations. And so the trade-off for that is if you want co-locations and as many of them as possible on a tower, the height will be up there, probably in the 90-foot range, maybe a little higher if you figure the first one is at 50, and if the rad centers are, say, 10 feet apart, and you want 4 of them on there.
That's okay. This is just I'm gonna give you this long version of it. I would ask Mr. Parker the answer, but you're an attorney, you probably can't tell me my exact number that I need.
Well, I can explain.
I don't want to explain, I don't care. Because, I guess the point is, Kathy, that's the number we need to know, because it's kind of an interesting thought that if we were to have a barn that was big enough, you could make the antenna right in the barn on either parcel. It wouldn't matter which parcel you put it on, it's right in there. And so you put like 5 antennas across, and you're 50 feet high, we'll put a little more dirt there and build the barn, and your antennas are all the same height.
Well, the maximum height for a building in that zone is only 45 feet.
Well, then we have to have an imagination. We'll put some dirt down below it and make it so it's up high enough. Doesn't say that you can't have dirt. Maybe they'll have a flood.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to give you some ideas and thoughts here, because I think that I don't really want to change our whole ordinance to begin with if we don't have to. But we have to give alternatives here to this site because of the special circumstances that have involved. And that is the fact that Crown has a tower there now, and we're asking them to move it. They're not asking to move it, we're asking them to move it. And so we need to help them somehow. And I don't know how else you do it, but try to think outside the box just a touch and come up with an idea. But when I heard the barn thought, it made me think that if you put the barn on a little berm and then you built the barn, then you put your little towers there, you're done.
Well, in that scenario, you could probably get one set of antennas added around the desired height for one carrier. And then there's no space.
Not necessarily. I mean, you just put them down the barn. Tell them to build a bigger barn so they can put them down the barn. I don't know how big an antenna is. I don't have any idea what we're talking about doing. And remember, Crown said that they don't care about West Sacramento. That's not what they're trying to service. All they're trying to service is I-5. That was the only thing your gentleman that was here said he was trying to service. There's no reason to have an antenna to serve West Sacramento because there was no need, according to him. His need was I-5, and that was his only need. So if that's true, I don't know why you couldn't have an antenna on top of the barn pointing towards I-5 that would take care of his need. If what he said was true last time, I don't know. It's a good thought. It gives you something to work on if you were asking my 2-bit opinion.
Sorry, follow-up clarification from one of Charlie's almost questions. The minimum height of a tower with 4 co-locations. Could we get that at the next meeting? Rough calculation, I would guess 100 feet. If you
Yeah,
s-
we can try to get some more specifics on that. I think, generally the rule of thumb is tennis centers are about 10 feet apart. And so if the first one is at 50, the next one might be at about 60, then about 70, about 80, and they can squeeze them a little tighter than that. We've seen that do it on like the existing pole. They're squeezed in there a little tighter than probably is optimal. But, that's, sort of generally a way to think about it.
Thanks. I'm not sure if it would affect our text in the policy, but it might affect the text. Or
Well, I
the
think my
choice.
question, my last comment for staff to think about is how high is our tower now? And our tower is 80 feet, I believe.
I believe it's 100, if I'm not
It could be
mistaken.
100 feet
Yeah.
of beautiful pine tree out there, but I thought it was a little less. And we probably should look at that number so that we're sure that we don't exceed that number when we come back to talking about putting it somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Oh, thank you, Charlie.
Welcome.
Commissioner Guerrero?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. One is, if the setback requirement is going to be measured to the nearest existing residential structure, not the property line, would this prevent any future structures that are not currently planned from being built in the future?
No, it would not.
And I'd like a little more information, Mona, if you can help me to understand, the part that begins with pursuant to federal law, failure to permit a wireless facility based on setback requirements and that part of it. I'm interested in knowing a little more about why the city cannot directly or indirectly prohibit a carrier or carriers from closing a coverage gap. Is there any influence the city can have in any way, and any local jurisdictions or any participant or affected party, I mean?
The city is limited primarily with its aesthetic regulations and land use policies when it comes to cell towers. The FCC has opined that health and safety reasons and other aspects cannot be used to preclude the construction of cell towers. In addition, as long as an applicant can demonstrate that there is a significant gap of coverage, then the city would need to consider and approve the cell tower based on that significant gap of coverage, but that initial burden rests on the applicant to demonstrate. Does that answer your question?
It does, it helps, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any other?
Well, I
Question?
do want to bring up another thing. One of the things that I'm continuing to struggle with the staff report is that we're really focusing on changing the policy, and it seems to me that this is a unique situation that is not likely to continue to arise, where because of city action, you're needing to take a certain, to relocate. So what I would recommend is instead of changing the policy, add into the policy that things that don't meet, this particular distance guideline under Section 3 that we keep referring to, that, it comes back for consideration. That would be my recommendation. That way you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater and completely changing policy that folks have worked on. However, that doesn't address the issue that we're really here for, which is what are we going to do with this particular cell phone tower? And I'm glad that Commissioner Guerrero asked that question about prohibitions on future real estate development. So that's good to know that it works one way but not the other, where a cell phone tower couldn't be placed where in a certain proximity of residential structures, but that wouldn't preclude residential structures from being constructed within a certain proximity. I don't know what that means for the potential land value of the property owner. They may want to weigh in on that. But anyway, my proposal is to not significantly change the policy, just put in that, when there's issues of maybe, relocation of cell phone towers, that it be brought back for, I hesitate to have it under administrator review. I would prefer to have it come back for for our review. So that's just something I wanted to put out there.
Any wireless facility in a residential area or proximity to residential would be coming to the planning commission, regardless. So, we'd be, I think, sounds like what you're maybe suggesting, Commissioner Austin, is some type of exception to how the policy is written, that we would need to maybe build in a mechanism to be able to provide an exception to this policy, this particular portion of the policy, and perhaps have some criteria for that, keeping in mind that our discretion over these kind of facilities, is limited, as our city attorney stated, and that, our generally we need to stay within the realm of aesthetics, on our facilities. That's principally what we have that remains within our discretion at our level, here at the, at the local government level. We're definitely in somewhat of a box based on what the federal law is, and so we're trying to remain compliant, with that while trying to, look after our community as well.
And
So David, I actually, if you could bring me some clarification, and I appreciate what Commissioner Austin and Commissioner Moore brought up. I understand that there's an issue with the current cell phone tower, but this policy change is being looked at because, as it reads, we may not be able to put any cell phone towers out there the way the current policy is written. Is that correct?
It's possible. Certainly, the two projects that we had talked about previously do not comply with the policy as written, presently. And so we've looked at a few of the other parcels around there as well, and it certainly seems that there's not a lot of other parcels where they could go, where they could comply, with the policy.
So that's my question now, and maybe you can clarify. If we are looking at a policy change for a isolated issue, I tend to agree, but if we are looking at future growth and what needs to go out there and what we project we need in cell towers out there as coverage requires it, then that's a different issue to me.
Well, it is, at least as the options are presented, this evening, even with some modifications, these would be applicable, in all areas of the city potentially. So I want to remind the commission of that and encourage you to, think of it in that manner. If the policy were to be changed, it would not be necessarily sort of localized in the Linden Road area. It would apply elsewhere as well. So,
but we're not faced with that sort of conundrum at this point, right? So,
well, we aren't.
Coverage works, as I recall, is it's not a tower every half a mile. It's based on the number of users in that general area. And we're not.
Yeah, we certainly have an acute issue that we've been obviously struggling with for a little while now, but we want to make sure that if we're not having any sort of unintended consequences by if we were to amend the policy, somewhere else, in town. So that's some of the things that, Kathy and I have been looking at most recently is, some other areas of our community where, it's possible someone may want to put up a facility, someday. Are we sort of opening the door further than we want to based on how the commission and council have established the policy, in the first place? Because, clearly when we put this together before, we didn't look at every parcel in town and try to test it, so to speak. And this just so happens this is first one out of the chute. We do have an issue, as in terms of a conflict with our current policy. So we're trying to figure out a way, because something kind of has to give here on some level. And so we're looking for commission's guidance and ultimately city council as to what that ultimate resolution should be, bearing in mind that any changes to the policy would be applicable, citywide potentially. So that's sort of the big picture view of sort of where we're at, even though a smaller situation has sort of prompted where we're at.
Commissioner Liebig.
Thank you. David, I realize that this is an isolated project that triggered this, but it was my understanding that we're struggling with the rural residential zone. And so when you mentioned this being applicable to the rest of the city, I would question actually where is the problem, and we should probably limit any change to the policy to that zone? In other words, are we focusing on rural residential here, or does the city foresee a problem in other zones as well?
Well, we were looking at the city just more from a geographic standpoint than necessarily how, a lot of properties are zoned. It's likely that conflicts such as we've been struggling with will likely potentially could come up in other rural and rural estate, zone properties in town where, you have lots that are an acre or more or around that. If you look at a setback distance of from a 100-foot tower on our current policy of say 200 feet, you could easily show where, that would fall over property lines onto other residential properties. It's just a situation where when you have a residentially zoned property proposed for a tower that's surrounded by other residentially zoned properties, it's likely that it's going to be difficult to be 200 feet away from any other residentially zoned properties unless you have a giant, 10-acre parcel and you put it right out in the middle. And, that's probably, unlikely, to occur. So here we are. Obviously we were thinking about this when we put this policy together, and with that, the Vickers site property where that was a commercial property but happened to be adjacent to residential. And so we were struggling with that because the carriers wanted to get their coverage into that adjacent residential neighborhood. That was their objective, and that was sort of the next frontier that we started to experience here in town, after many of them were built primarily in industrial areas, in years past. And so it just shows how this sort of has evolved, since we first started doing this, and what sort of prompted updating our wireless policy, which was unchanged since 1997 up until, 2013. And obviously this industry has changed, dramatically, in that time period. So where we're trying to get to is something that might ease the quandary that we're in relative to these real-world projects, but to also not, crack the door open much wider than I think anyone on the Planning Commission or City Council might want to do, based on how we previously had discussed this policy, several times before the Planning Commission and even a few stops at City Council.
Commissioner Guerrero, did you have one other comment?
I just had, again, on the, the FCC application and the city being involved in that as well. And if the gap, in closing the gap in coverage, includes another city's coverage area, could that application then be affected in moving forward? Say, for example, so maybe I just don't have enough information and understanding that process. But I'm just taking a look at it, down the road, as this being one of the reasons why option 3 is there as a recommended option. And if the coverage area is beyond the city of West Sacramento, it includes another city as part of, and the city would have to take a look at that, and it's incumbent on the applicant to demonstrate that it is closing the coverage gap. What other jurisdictions would need to be involved?
I wouldn't necessarily look at it as whether the city of West Sacramento could, for example, punt the cell tower to another city because it might affect them as well. The issue is whether the cell carrier or the applicant can demonstrate that there is a significant gap in coverage, but for the placement of the cell tower, they wouldn't have that. That's really the question before you. So if they can demonstrate that, and as long as it meets all of the aesthetic requirements, including setback, for example, then the city should approve that and should not be rejecting the application based on the fact that users may be traveling the I-5 corridor or users might be in a different jurisdiction.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Moore?
Thank you. The I-5 corridor, I only use that as an example because that's what the carrier told us he was doing last time. But secondly, almost every new project that we approved over the past years down in the Southport area, and that encompasses a great deal of our land down there, we're all going to have some sort of a structure built that would house a cell tower in it, so it could be disguised. And I remember we talked to Richland, we talked to David Stroud, all of them talked about having some sort of a facade tower that we could put that in. So I think we are going to eliminate some of those issues that you talked about out in that area if they, in fact, do exactly what they said. So, again, I think this is a special circumstance. I think it's rather unique to our city, and I think that's how we should try to treat it, rather than try to trade or try to get rid of everything that we've worked on. Treat this as a special circumstance and see what would best work for that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. I'd like to thank staff for the revision on the revision. And I would like to, see if there was any of the changes that were discussed tonight that you guys need clarification on. I know Commissioner Liebig had a couple of comments. Were those things that you got put down, were written down, or is that something you need to go over once again?
Well, I think the most common theme we heard from all the commissioners tonight is that if we're going to have any setbacks at all, we want those measured from property lines, not from
Not from the home.
structures.
Right.
And that we would want to make sure we consider existing and any future residences to best we could, not just existing ones for any areas that were planned for residential. So, we also heard a consistent theme that the commission would prefer not to change the policy substantially and would rather try to narrow any changes to try to address the situation that has been in front of us, rather than, look at anything, citywide and sort of undo what had been done, previously by the commission and council. So, we still have to figure out a way to address how the policy was written as it pertains to those specific properties. But if the commission wants to more narrowly focus this to, say, rural residential zone properties, we could get there hopefully in a little more narrow fashion and not, change things much more significantly than is necessary, and keep the way the commission and council had approved the policy before for the vast majority of the city, but try to address where we feel like we have a more, special circumstance, I believe, as, Commissioner Moore mentioned, where this does appear to be an anomaly in our community that we're facing right now. So when we return to you at your next meeting, we can put something together for your consideration that would be more narrowly focused and try to minimally change the policy as needed to try to address the situation we were at, and then those projects would come forward to you later under their own merits, at that time, assuming the council agreed with any, changes to the policy that the commission recommends.
Thank you. Do you have anything else?
I do. I have a
Okay.
point of clarification. Martha, do you want to
You
go
wanna go
first?
first,
Oh,
Martha?
thank you very much. Thank you, David. I appreciate your explanation that you provided as you were looking at making it broader. It would have been helpful to have more background on that. If you were interested in continuing to do that, provide more background. I think we were looking at it from the narrow perspective because of the background that was provided. But, I'm still open, to looking at it from a broader perspective if you think it's useful at this point in time.
Commissioner Liebig?
Thank you, David. As far as trying to keep with the theme of not modifying the policy, treating this as an exception, but we still have to actually modify the policy to allow for this project. Is there a way to include a trigger under, it's section F2, which is just the permit section, a trigger for a special circumstance and include higher level of scrutiny for these types of projects? In other words, how do we write it in that the commission needs to consider it, but they shall use higher level of scrutiny?
Well, we would need to define what that meant and make sure that that level of scrutiny remained, compliant with the federal and state preemptions that are applicable to us.
That's my bigger concern.
Yes.
Is it legal?
Yeah, we have a somewhat narrow path to walk on these
Okay.
things, and we're trying to do our best to do that. And it's definitely challenging, for us, because this is not, even though we're doing a use permit, it's not quite the same type of use permit that we do in other things because of these other, federal laws that we have to make sure we follow. So, any additional scrutiny would still need to be within that realm. And off the top of my head, I'm not certain what additional scrutiny we would apply beyond, what is in the policy presently for example, from a design, standpoint.
I think we would have to define a special circumstance.
That, absolutely.
Commissioner Austin?
Yeah, well, maybe what the solution, I think what you're trying to get at is generally directing staff into what type of verbiage we want to see in the policy, and maybe it really is under section G. The issue is that this is that what is being proposed is a prohibited facility. So what we can put in is maybe G item, would that be 4? For proposals that don't meet, that are within these prohibited facilities, but are within the scope of, federal requirements, maybe zoning administrator or someone would have discretion. I mean, something, you know what I mean? Something like that, where it's prohibited under a policy, but it's not prohibited under federal law. Proposals can come by for kind of one case-by-case consideration. I think that's what I was trying to say. I don't know if that's consistent with what you're trying to say.
You could possibly kick it back to, so at the bottom of section G, which is prohibited facilities, do a clause that, that's an odd one.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no matter what, I
You
think,
can wordsmith, but.
I think you're getting
That
kicked
coverage
back
gap
to
thing could
add.
tell us to act. I mean,
So I think you're right, but the gap coverage wouldn't seem like it's enough, because you're gonna have gap coverage periodically.
Anywhere.
It would have to be something along the lines of, when there's no other options. You're telling me there's minimal options in that area to put a tower right now. It would have to be a very narrow need, bypass the current policy.
Well, yeah,
Not just the gap coverage issue.
yeah, I think, the gap coverage issue certainly is there, and as is provided for in the law. So for us, what we keep coming back to is the same point, which is what, if any, setback does the commission want for towers proposed? What, if any, setback from residentially zoned properties does the commission want to have?
David, could it
If any.
vary?
Yeah.
Could it vary based on, less, as it's written now, say that this is what's prohibited, or not say that it's prohibited, but say anything above this will require this special set of circumstances and consideration? Is it possible to get 2 or 3 different categories in there, depending on the height?
Yeah, I think,
And the
the maybe,
distance to the property.
one way to potentially, get there on this is, you keep the policy sort of written as is, and you maintain your setback policy, which generally we believe was a good addition to our policy from before. But you could provide an exception clause that the planning commission could grant an exception to that based on.
Like anything greater than the 1-to-2 ratio would need this process X to happen, like what we're talking about. That makes sense?
I think
Is that what you're after, Russ?
yeah, I think that's what I was after
Anything
was.
beyond the 1-to-2 ratio, like anything that's gonna go above that, we would have this new process and this new consideration.
That requires two
Would that be
things.
similar to like a PCNN determination?
Yeah, something along those lines. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but that sounds right.
So,
Joe makes it sound better than what, probably, I don't know.
so, if I'm following you right, I think under prohibited facilities, we would need to modify the less than twice the distance to a distance that the commission is comfortable with for an absolute minimum. And then on the permitted is where you add your special
Well,
circumstances.
we would move it out of prohibited, basically, and say that this 1-to-2 is the standard, okay? And then above that, we would go through the special process like what you're talking about. So it kind of reverses the logic and says, the 1-to-2 is you know, that's our maximum. And then beyond that, here's this new set of requirements.
Right, so section, follow me here, I'm sorry, F to F, it's lowercase f, add something regarding between, okay, I'm just gonna throw it out hypothetically, because we haven't said it, the 1-to-1 ratio, height to distance. So anything between twice the distance and 1-to-1, you put in your special circumstances clause, higher scrutiny. Under the prohibited facilities, you then have to change that distance to 1-to-1.
Oh, yeah, you could set a ceiling there under prohibited if you wanted to.
But I think that's,
I'm going to have to interrupt just so I'm not quite clear on what the commission is referring to when it says a heightened scrutiny, because you have to recall, we're limited to aesthetics, which can include design and step backs. And we also have to make sure that our policy doesn't result in either a total prohibition or an effective prohibition, meaning that it's so narrow and so strict that our policy precludes anyone from existing. So this additional language that you'd like staff to craft that requires a higher scrutiny, I want to caution you about our limitations based on federal preemption.
if towers between the distance of twice the distance and 1-to-1 may be considered by the commission under special circumstances. Special circumstances could include, and then list them out. Is that considered higher scrutiny? All right, y'all, I can't see her.
Well,
Which is why I keep
nodding or.
She did
She
not.
said no.
The greater that ratio is, the more important the aesthetics are, so these are the new.
That's right. I see,
I mean,
I think the aesthetics.
I'm not a lawyer, but
Yeah, the aesthetics become,
Charlie is.
yeah, right.
So if
But-
I'm hearing you correctly, we want to have a maximum setback of twice the height, but then you want to allow different setbacks.
No, if
There-
it goes over twice the height, then we want to be able to say, here's this new set of aesthetics that we need to look at.
Yeah, if you
If
cannot.
we're gonna have to be able to do
So
this.
twice the height would be our,
Preferred.
but I think what we're more concerned about is something comes in less than that.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that one you can have scrutiny on. You can, if it comes below that, now you can look at the aesthetics. You could see
Yes.
if we're going to have just a metal tower up there, or are we gonna have a tree, or are we gonna
Yes.
have a water tank? Now you look at that scrutiny. That's your additional scrutiny that you're gonna put towards this, is how can we best hide it so that it's less obtrusive to the community? And
We can-
I
we can
think that's
cer-
well within our right.
We can certainly do that, but I do want to remind you that you do have that ability even at twice the height.
That's good to know. We like that, Mom. That's how we ended up with the water tank.
Exactly.
See?
Any other comments? Okay, I'd like to inform the audience that a public hearing on the proposed changes to the wireless telecommunications facility policy is scheduled for May 15th, 2014.
That's our plan right now.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 2. Oh, do we need to read anything?
Oh, you have to close the public hearing.
Oh, that's right. I will close the public hearing and move on to agenda item number 2. Zoning administrator interpretation regarding a home occupation business.
Give the room a minute to clear out. So we want to bring forth this matter to the commission tonight, and I'll try to be as concise as possible. We've had a code enforcement complaint come in recently regarding a vehicle at a home that has, where there's a legal home occupation there, where there's a vehicle that's used as part of the home occupation that has some form of advertising for that particular home occupation on the vehicle. The vehicle in question is a van. It's a non-commercial vehicle, but it's It's a van, it's not a large truck or anything like that. It's something that could otherwise be in a residential area, but for having some form of advertising on it. What are the provisions in the home occupation section? The zoning ordinance talks about not allowing any, there shouldn't be any exterior evidence of the presence of a home occupation, visible. And